abandoned, disused, unloved. Once a small, thriving homestead in rural Ireland, Ballyspring Farm was at the heart of the community. Wheat, barley and oats were just some of the crops that were grown here throughout its heyday. Livestock too grazed the rolling meadows, providing produce for the locals to live on.
That was until the drought of 2004. The famous lake at the heart of Ballyspring ran dry, leaving the farm's crops to fail and the livestock to perish. Abandoned by its owners for pastures new, the farm lies as it was nearly 20 years later. 2 decades of rot, decay and death have left the farm in a state of disrepair. Little-known farmer Tom Ox has plans to invest £100,000 to rebuild the farm back to its former glory. Only time will tell if he has the ability to bring life back to the once thriving farm. Our year began in August, the height of summer. We started with a look round our farm to try and fathom what lay ahead of us. We had a lot of space to work with, some buildings that would do for now, but then we discovered the horror. Withered crops, overgrown fields, dumped vehicles, abandoned greenhouses, and random grain all over the floor. This was going to be a challenge. Our first job was to get ourselves some accommodation. There was nowhere to sleep on the farm, so we had to buy ourselves a tent. That would do for the time being. Next, we went to inspect our greenhouses and garden plots and noticed we'd already lost more than £10,000 of our original starting budget. We had no idea where such a sizable chunk of our money had gone, but we didn't have time to worry about it. Our first actual farming purchase was a small tap and a hose pipe. This would be essential for keeping our greenhouses and produce plots well watered. It was time to pick up our first major bit of machinery. Well, maybe bits of machinery. We jumped into the farming catalogue and browsed the various tractors that we liked the look of. Now, I'll be honest, I know next to nothing about tractors. What did a different wheel setup do? What's manual plus power shift? I just wanted something with a bit of power to help get various jobs done that we'd need to be doing over the next few months. I figured around 150 horsepower would be ideal for what we need. Who knows? We eventually settled on the Fendt 500 favourite with the biggest engine upgrade I could find. We also added a cheeky front loader as well. With that leased, our attention turned to water tanks. We needed to transport water from our newly installed tap to all the various locations around the farm. The Abbey 550 did the trick, so we leased that too. Oh, isn't she beautiful? Looking perfect in the classic farmer's green? We hopped in, switched her on and began hitching up the water tank. This was the first time we travelled the journey from the shop back to our farm, passing many other fields in various stages of crop growth along the way. Soon, we would have crops of our own growing in our fields too. We began filling our greenhouses and planters with water so we could start growing our first produce. Tomatoes, lettuce and strawberries were all being grown with the hope of making some good money for other ventures on the farm. Next, we needed a cultivator, something to tear away all the withered crops out of our field and leave it ready for something new. We used the handy store delivery option to save us having to drive all the way to the store and back. We hired some help to do the simple job of cultivating the field while we continued with other work on the farm. Our other field was overgrown with grass and weeds. We'd be mad not to mow and bale it, wouldn't we? We decided to lease the cheapest mower and baler we could find and leased another tractor in order for us to complete the work. We got straight to work, mowing and baling the field simultaneously. By early afternoon, we had just about mown and baled the entire field, if you don't look at the scruffy bits we missed. Our helper had finished cultivating the other field. Well, when I say finished, he did miss bits. We tidied up the bits they missed and continued on with our next task. As it was still August, there was only one seed in season for planting, and that was canola. We leased a seeder and a front weight to sow the seed and spent the rest of the afternoon sowing our first field. Well, apart from we didn't do that, we hired someone to do the work. Again, we had the rock and roll job of bale collecting. Now, we did spend the rest of the afternoon collecting up the millions of bales in our field. We sold a couple of loads to the highest bidder, but kept 5 for ourselves for future plans. As the warm August evening rumbled on, we checked back in with our hired worker, who somehow still wasn't finished sowing the field. Sure, they'd taken over 5 hours to do it, but it was a really thorough job. They finished a few hours later as the sun set over the Irish hills, and we settled into bed. It had been a busy, expensive, but mostly successful first month on the farm, but we were excited for what lay ahead. As September's first light broke through the trees, we pondered our jobs for the month. Getting to work on our recently cut grass field was a must. Before we got to work, we took a gentle stroll up to our greenhouse and vegetable plots to see if there's been any progress. To our surprise, there had been, but we also noticed something in the corner. A huge stack of logs. These could make us some serious money. We started the morning cultivating the field to give it a blank canvas. And after a few hours, we were back to seeding. It being September, we had a bigger choice of crops to plant. We chose oats, for no particular reason whatsoever. In our true style, we splashed the cash on some extra help to seed the field as we headed back to the farmyard.
It was at this moment that the local scrap man turned up and took away all the old broken farm machinery littering around the farm. He gave us a couple of £100 for our troubles, which helped a little bit. After only a month, our greenhouses were beginning to grow produce for us to sell. We started looking for a second vehicle that would be able to haul our newly grown produce to market. We ended up with a mighty Mahandra Retriever, which essentially was a glorified quad bike. And after picking up a trailer too, both leased mind you, we realised we also needed a way to get the pallets of goods onto the trailer. Handily, the local shop loaned us their forklift. Less handily, this was a really long distance away from the farm, and the forklift has an earth-shattering top speed of 17 kilometers per hour. After what felt like a lifetime, we finally got the forklift to the farm. With our new trailer in position, we slowly started loading all the produce onto it. We finally got all the produce loaded. 2,000 litres of strawberries and 1,000 litres of tomatoes were going to make us rich. We checked where we were going to make the most cash from and set off. It turned out the local pub were willing to pay big bucks for this fantastic fresh produce. We dropped it off and we were furnished with a solid £1,613 for our troubles. Maybe not the mega bucks we dreamt of, but a good start nonetheless. As the hired help was still seeding the field, we decided to tackle the large log pile we found at the back of the top field. We grabbed our chainsaw and attempted to cut each log down into manageable 200 kilogram chunks that we'd be able to safely carry and put onto the trailer. By late afternoon, we were very bored of looking at, cutting and loading what felt like thousands of logs. We checked back in with our hired farmer and he'd finally finished seeding the middle field. We booted him out of the cab and leased a fertiliser spreader and 2 big bags of fertiliser. We coated both fields as the sun began to set to signal the end of our second month in Ballyspring, but we had one more, slightly delicate job to do before we could hit the hay. With our trailer now full of logs, we attempted to take the logs to the sawmill to sell. It turned out our little glorified quad bike wasn't really suitable for carrying such a heavy load. We crashed, rolled over, got stuck on hills, crashed again, and held up half the town. We eventually decided to go back to the farm and get our big tractor to come down to save the day. We finally got to the sawmill at gone 8 p.m, sold all the logs we collected for nearly £5,000. That was a lot more like it.
We woke early as October began, just after 7 a.m, and to our amazement, more produce had grown, so we loaded it all up and took it to the market to sell. Not to the pub this time, but another good payday of well over £3,000. As we drove back up to the farm, we noticed that a few of our fields needed some jobs doing on them. Firstly, we needed to pull all the weeds out from both fields, not an easy task. There was something magical about doing little jobs about the farm though, as the sun poked through the auburn trees on the hillside. Once again, as you probably predicted, we got some extra help to weed the field while we took care of some other jobs. We decided to clear the top field. After clearing out the bushes and shrubs, we chopped down the odd few trees that had sprouted up during the years of neglect. After loading up the trailer with yet more logs and trunks, we made our next big investment. We welcomed 12 new members of our farm family, some sheep and some goats. We just about made the space for a little run for the sheep to play in the top field. We loaded them up with the grass bales that we cut earlier and topped them up with some water. After we finished tending to our new residents, we took the remaining wood down to the carpenters to sell, this time with far less incident than the last. Another 6,200 really helped repay the little bit of outlay we had on the sheep and goats. As the afternoon rolled on, we didn't have a lot to do on the farm. We dipped into the contracts that other locals needed doing and took a simple mowing and baling job near the main town. 4 hours later of mowing, baling and drapping, we were paid £7,000 for the work, as well as pocketing over £17,000 on top of that for the excess bales. We take that, that's not too bad. Night was really rolling in as we drove back to the farm. We fed the sheep again before we settled down for the night. They're hungry ones, eh? With little work to do for ourselves still, we started November with another grass cutting job. A combined total for the job and excess bales of nearly 9,000 was more than worth it, although it did take up most of the morning. At this point, we decided to make our next big move with machinery. We said goodbye to our trusty friend, the Fendt 515. It had been a superb machine for the early months, but we were getting to the stage where we needed something bigger and with more horsepower around the farm. Say hello to the John Deere 7810. We also leased a front loader as we knew we needed to do certain things with it around the farm. The bottom field needed yet more weeding work, so we needed to lease a big weeder. We whipped that around the field to keep the canola in top shape. While that work continued, we went back to the farm to make another big investment. We added to our recent livestock purchases with 10 pigs this time. A mixture of breeds to keep things interesting. They slotted in perfectly next to the sheep in the top field. It turned out the pigs needed a different type of food to the sheep, not the grass that the sheep were eating, so we had to buy in bags of feed. We tried to use the rather shaky forklift that we borrowed from the shop to deliver the food to the pigs. This was a little hopeless. So we went shopping again to get some pallet forks to use with the tractor, and it worked perfectly. With sheep and pigs both fed and watered, we called it a day before the sun had even set. There's not a lot to do in November, it turns out, so we got an early night. We climbed out of bed at gone 9 AM and the sun still wasn't even up at this time. After neglecting to sell our produce in November, we had a lot to deal with this morning. So we loaded up the trailer again to try and claw some of the money back we'd recently spent, as we were now worryingly low on finances. After selling almost all of what we had, one pallet of tomatoes we had stacked a little too high was proving troublesome. We doubled our available funds to over £11,000. We then grabbed the one available contract, cultivating a field for local Neil Costello. Cultivating wasn't my favourite contract task as you weren't able to make any additional money on the side from the extra bales. At least it was quick. Once again, we subcontracted the work out as we had an idea of something we could do back at base. It was time to upgrade our rather old-looking vegetable plots. We managed to sell off both vegetable plots for £5,000 each. I'm not quite sure how, but I didn't ask any questions about the price, I just took it and smiled. We replaced them with brand new state-of-the-art greenhouses. This would hopefully up our productivity and make us more money in the long run. With the AI once again making a complete mess of the job we'd given to them, we went to tidy up and finish off. A payment of £2,500 didn't seem too bad for the work done, and we finished off the month with just less than £5,000 in our account. I was a little worried knowing that the contract work would dry up for the next few months and we'd struggle to produce high amounts on the farm to get a good payday. We were going to have to get creative. We began January with the usual runaround of feeding and watering our livestock. We then took the decision to sell 3 of the bale sacks of grass that we had in the shed. Unfortunately, we got less than £1,000 for it, so we had to come up with more ideas to make good money for the farm. When we got back to the farm, we decided to rent a front scoop for the tractor to see if we could get anything from the random piles of grain left in the old shed. We scooped it up and dropped it off into the grain silo. It turned out there was quite a lot there, over 9,500 litres of wheat and over 5,000 litres of barley. We took the opportunity to sell right now. We adapted our little trailer so we could carry grain and loaded it up and took it to be sold. The wheat earned us just shy of 7,000 in total, and we got just over 3,500 for the barley. It was a welcome bonus after our mass expenditure in November and December. It was at this point we took the decision to have the old ruined farmhouse demolished. We had considered getting it rebuilt to its former glory, but it just wasn't going to be viable. We got £4,800 from the usable materials and started to think of what could go there in the future. We couldn't keep on sleeping in our tent forever.
February began, and after mastering the art of carrying 2 pig feed bags at the same time, well, sort of, we covered the fields in a nice thick coating of lime. I'm fairly sure that this should have been done a little bit earlier in the year, but better late than never, right? We checked back in with the animals and both pigs and the sheep were close to having their first young, which was really exciting. After faffing around with the lime and getting excited about little animals joining our farm, our greenhouse produce had absolutely exploded. So it turned out these new greenhouses grew things a lot quicker than the old vegetable plots. Again, we loaded up and sold everything we'd grown, again for a really good price. Without a lot to do in these winter months, we decided to drop into the pub afterwards for a refreshing drink and a meal.
Sometime later.
we eventually rolled out after the sun had gone down. We had no idea how long we were in there for, but we had to somehow make our way home. After a long stumble, we crashed down into our tent. We set our alarm early for the next morning. We hoped we wouldn't be feeling it too much by the time we woke up. As our alarm jerked us awake early in March, we woke up to the new sounds of animals coming from the fields. The babies were here! We rushed over to check everyone was okay, and to our relief they were. We decided to sell a few of the adults as the pens were approaching capacity. It was at this point we realised that we had a lot more land than we thought. Now, you'd think we would have worked this out at the start, when signing our contracts, looking at the land deeds, all that, you know. But no, this little strip of land here was ours, and we'd not realised for 7 long months. We cleared away the hedges to reveal some gorgeous trees and grassland. Naturally, we're going to chop down all the trees to make the most money we could from it. This time, instead of selling the logs, we decided to take a slightly different route. We hired a chipper. Yes, it cost nearly $10,000 just to lease the thing. Yes, it was huge, and yes, it needed a lot of power to run it. But, wood chips were worth a lot of money. And by our reckoning, if we could fill up 2 complete loads of the chipper, we'd be making really good profit. Plus, chipping wood seemed like so much more fun than chopping up logs and selling them, so we got to work. So we got cracking, chopping up logs into manageable chunks and loading them into the sometimes temperamental chipper. Soon enough, we had 16,000 litres of wood chips ready to sell, so off we went. The first load alone paid us over 10,000. This was our new money maker. We did have some issues where we couldn't chip the spruce logs for some bizarre reason, so we sold them the old, boring, standard way. But otherwise, we were away and we were loving it. After our realisation of the extra land and wood chips in March, April was gonna be our month. As soon as we could, we got to work, cutting down, chopping and selling every tree we could get our hands on. Unfortunately, the sale price was slowly dropping away from the high we had in March, but we were still getting over £8,000 per trailer full, even if we did unload it in a slightly unorthodox way. 3 loads sold by lunchtime and we were enjoying ourselves, as was our bank balance. By late afternoon, we were racing back towards the £100,000 mark. We even took a lease for a swanky stump grinder to tidy up the recently chopped down trees even more. The month ended with another bulk sale of produce, this time including the sheep's wool that had been accumulating over the winter months. Another 6,600 in our pocket rounded off the day perfectly. There were times over the winter where we weren't sure if we'd actually survive financially, but here we were at the end of April with over £80,000 sitting nicely in our bank account. Perfect. May started with us cutting, baling and wrapping the grass on our recently discovered strip of land. Once that was complete, we loaded up the 5 bales it produced along with all the greenhouse produce that was ready, and off we went. Another 4,500 was a nice way to top up the bank balance at the start of the day. As the weather was getting warmer, more contracts were appearing, and most excitingly, they were our favourite for making an extra few quid on the side: grass cutting contracts. We grabbed a tasty looking one and got to work. Once again, we utilised local help to get the job done quickly, but we did have a new obstacle. We had to make use of these bale loaders on the front and back of a tractor that we just couldn't get our heads around. They were tricky to load, not easy to drive when fully loaded, but we eventually got the job done and got our payday. After we finished the job, we headed home for the day. With our first year on the farm slowly drawing to a close, we hoped we could end the year with a financial bang. June began with the sun peeking over the hills, and we started off by checking in with our crops to look at their progress. They were nearly ready to harvest. It looked like July would be the month when we would be ready to go. So we grabbed another contract and ended up using some of the biggest mowers I've ever seen. One thing I really did like about these contracts is trying out different tractors and equipment. It was sort of like a test drive, while getting paid. Not bad. We were paid a nice $22,000 for the work and the additional bales combined. Not bad, but it did nearly take all day. We did another produce run to round off the day, but this time we took it to the pub, which was a nice change. The time had finally come. The time we had dreamt about for the entire year. It was time for our first harvest. Giddy with excitement, we woke early and raced to the oat field and saw it was in perfect condition to be harvested. We sprinted down the field, jumped over the road and fence to check on the canola field. It was the same, ready to go. It was time for some hefty investments now. We needed to lease a combine harvester along with a header so we could harvest both crops. We'd also need some additional things later, but we were so excited to start we couldn't see past the harvester for now. Before our first brew of the day had even time to cool, we loaded up the harvester and were ready to go. As we got to work harvesting the oat field, we did lease a larger trailer so we could deposit the produce when the combine began to fill up. We again decided to hire a worker to help us out by driving the combine while we pulled alongside to take the precious cargo off into our trailer. As grain prices were at rock bottom, it being the middle of the summer, we decided to store all of the harvest in our silos. We spent a fine few hours going back and forth between the field and silo, carefully carrying our precious first crop. We even found time to gather up the leftover straw and make them into bales for a little extra financial boost as well. By the late morning, the oat field had been fully harvested and the grain safely stored. The straw had been baled and we were ready to move on to the canola field. The afternoon very much followed the rhythm of the morning. Harvest, deposit, store, bale, repeat. By mid-afternoon, the majority of the hard work was complete. We had over 30,000 litres of oats and canola combined in our silo, an amazing result from a really hard first year on the farm. We picked up a new trailer for us to carry more straw bales and began loading up, with a few mishaps here and there. With the price of straw low as well, we stored the bales in one of our sheds to wait for a better payday. They'd keep for another day when the prices were a lot better. We decided to round off our first year on the farm by doing the thing we really wanted to do first. We'd been living in a tent for all this time and we needed to replace the farmhouse. It would give us a proper place to sleep. We also found time to do a little bit of terraforming with some lush new green ground and neat gravel path leading up to the new farmhouse. As the sun set over Ballyspring, we felt pride in our work. It had been a tough year, very tough at times, but we now found ourselves in a much better position than when we started. As the sun dipped over the distant hills, we ended the year in the way much of it had already gone, by ensuring our livestock was well fed, watered and healthy. What a year it had been on the farm.